Welcome to the Contagious Code podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I am Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, my guest is Richard Rodger, the founder and CEO of VoxGig, and also one of the founders of Nearform, Europe's largest Node.js consultancy, maybe even one of the largest in the world. As mentioned, Nearform, Richard's first company, is just synonymous with Node.js consulting. They've helped literally so many of the Fortune 500 get far, far better at Node.js, especially in terms of performance and security. And they are some of the world's biggest experts, right? They offer like white glove consulting where they will come alongside clients and really solve their problems. And from Nearform, a number of really great founders and products have emerged. No doubt VoxGig, as we'll discuss here, but also Matteo Collina with Platformatic.dev. You may have heard of this. We'll get Matteo on the podcast at some point. And Michele Riva, founder of Orama Search, or Ask Orama. We'll also get him on the pod. There's some really great folks come out of Nearform, Node.js experts to form companies, and we will get them on the podcast. But there's no doubt that this company, Nearform, has just left massive, massive, massive footprints and impressions in the Node.js world. And today we have Richard, who comes from that, to found VoxGig. VoxGig is a developer relations consultancy. So having established the world's biggest Node.js consultancy, Richard decided, hey, developer relations is an important topic. And what would it look like to duplicate that model, right? What would it look like to create Nearform, but for DevRel, or developer relations? And in our discussion today, we talk about that. We go deep into starting a consultancy and then running one well. We talk about the value of long-term high trust relationships. And really, if there's enough high trust over the long term, then you've got pretty sustainable business. We talk all about the business side, but also the technical details of developer relations. If you're interested in either running a consulting business, community, or doing developer relations well, then no doubt this episode is for you. This is very much separate to my day job, and I'd like to offer this to you at no cost. And the way we can do that and cover the cost is through partners and sponsors. And I will just say this. I think it's important to have partners and sponsors that I actually agree with and I think are good. And so to that end, I'm never going to sit here and offer you like an AG1 drink subscription thing because frankly, I don't drink AG1. And based on things like Brian Johnson says, I don't know that I will. Anyway, in any case, let's take a moment to acknowledge the sponsors, and then we'll get into the episode. The Contagious Code podcast is, and has been for a while now, thank you, sponsored by Code Crafters, which I think is just a great product. Code Crafters helps you level up your programming skills by having you pick a programming language, JavaScript, Python, TypeScript, whatever, and then having you pick a tool that developers use, Git, Redis, Docker, etc. And they do this thing where they have you build that tool from scratch in the language you choose. By doing this, you get better at the language, but you also get better at the tool. And they sort of hold your hand the whole way and guide you as you do that. It's a really great way to learn two things at the same time and get exceptionally good at them. They have a paid model, but if you want 40% off, you can use the link in the show notes. That's tej.as/codecrafters. Look, the Contagious Code podcast has been running for a while now, and we're always open to partner and sponsor with whoever. So if you're interested or your company is interested, please reach out. We'd love to chat with you. That's just go to tej.as. We'll put a link in the show notes for that. Anyway, thank you for sticking around. Now for my discussion with Richard Rodger. Richard Rodger, welcome.
Hey, Tejas. How you doing?
Doing well, thank you. It's good to have you on. I've been a guest twice on your podcast, and so I figure it's about time to have you on mine.
Yeah, I owed you one, buddy. I owed you one.
I'm really excited to dive in today to talk about VoxGig and developer relations and even some of the earlier stuff. I've seen you've been pretty active with microservices and so on. So I think this will be a great discussion. In terms of outcomes, I think it'd be really great if we, this is part of founder and CEO season. And we've been extracting some really great insights from a number of founders, both technical and non-technical. You yourself, I see, is probably a technical founder. And I think, if we can give the listeners something super valuable to take away and use in their everyday tech careers, I think we're already on a good way. So with that, I'd love to maybe get started by just having you introduce yourself, your background, where you've been, what you're up to, and then we can narrow the scope of discussion from there.
Sure. So my name is Richard Rodger. My one big regret in my tech career is that I never ended up working for a big company. I came this close to working in SAP, but I've always ended up in small and large consultancies and startups, either as a founder or part of the sort of initial dev team. But I've seen big companies up close as well, so they kind of scare me. So I think I'll stick to building new things. Yeah, I got into this. I got into this game out of laziness. So I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, so I ended up studying mathematics and philosophy. There's not a huge amount of jobs in school when you're doing that stuff. The first proper summer job I had was working in a cleaning supplies warehouse. It was good money, but it was under...
What was the role of mathematics and or philosophy there? Was it...
well, actually, so I was... I'm Irish, but I went to Germany for the summer to find a job. The role of mathematics and philosophy was that I could parse the output of the orders printer. It was like a dot matrix printer. With a very poor understanding of German, I could still figure out the relationship between what was printed on the page and which aisle and shelf you had to go to.
Wow! Kind of so it's like literally fix my printer.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah, it's always about printers, dude. Everything. It always comes out printers and email. Yeah, that was a great job. I made good money, as a student. But it was under a hot tin roof, literally, in the middle of summer in Germany, which gets pretty hot. And
there's no air conditioning?
There's no air conditioning. Oh, no. No, they don't do that. Moving 20-liter bottles of acid around the place. That was fun.
My goodness.
Especially when they're up on the third shelf. So when I went back to uni the next year, I was like, okay, you know what? Next summer, it's going to be indoor work with no heavy lifting. So in the meantime, I was very lucky that the maths department, they still had VT100 terminals. Okay, so these are like the green screen guys, literal green screen cathode ray, right? Classic. They had an attic where they had them.
Wow. But by green screen, do you mean the thing like the Matrix screen, with the ones and zeros scrolling? Oh, wow.
Literally. Okay. Literally, right? And it was not Vim, It was Vi, right? Okay, it was like the proper thing.
Wow.
Right? FreeBSD, the whole thing. That's because the maths department ran their own computers. So we all got a login. And you all got... CGI access, right? Common Gateway Interface. If you remember, I don't know. If anybody listening to this was alive in the 90s, they'll remember that. That's how we used to build websites, right?
I was alive in the 90s, and I think this is a very useful tangent to go down, because I built a bunch of websites with WordPress, and back in the day it was like you open an FTP client and you just drag and drop your PHP files or your HTML files. But there was always, Richard, this directory CGI-bin.
Yes.
I never knew what that was. Like, my hosting providers just put it there, and there were scripts in there that I was told not to touch. Yeah. But you mentioned CGI. What is? I bet you there's a bunch of millennials / Gen Z folks listening who don't know what that is. Can we talk about that? So
back in the day, right, the way websites worked was you had very early versions of Apache, or even before that, right, the National Standards Authority HTTP server, or whatever, right? But that was one process. So to actually run your own scripts to do stuff, it would spawn another process, like a Perl script, okay? Mm-hmm. And then it would open a Unix pipe and pipe in whatever the HTTP request was into your script, so your script could generate a HTML page or whatever. This is so we're with server-side rendering, right? We're back to the 90s. That's how we used to do it. We had our own CGI bin that we could put Perl scripts in.
So what does that mean? So you put a script in there in this directory written in Perl, which is a programming language, and so when the script gets executed, I don't get it. So
this is text, right? Just think this is like a Unix pipe. This is a Unix command. What comes in is the HTTP request in text, the bytes. right? So you
Okay.
have to parse the whole thing yourself. Now, obviously, it's utilities. And then
Wow.
you construct HTML as text and literally print it out to standard out. And
Wow.
that becomes
Okay.
a
And
web
so
page.
that's
Awesome.
crazy. Man.
So
Okay,
cool.
so that
So cool.
there was method to the madness of CGI. I didn't know because like locally I was running like LAMP or WAMP or MAMP, which is, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. And this was a web server and I could just run my stuff locally. But then I never I really don't understand the CGI thing, and now that you've mentioned it, I'm stuck. I'm locked into this. And I think our listeners are as well. So how does it work, Richard? What I mean is, if you have a web server, like an Apache server, Node.js server, whatever, it's listening on a port. And when somebody sends a request to whatever address, localhost port 3000, sure, bytes are sent as as HTTP packets, right, to the server. How is CGI different from that?
So later on, you ended up with your code that built the website inside the web server. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But this was back in
Yes.
the days before anybody had figured this stuff out. So all you had is a web server that could serve static files,
Okay.
or spawn a child process and get the child process to return HTML.
Okay, so the
So
CGI
this all
bin
just
would
stuck
receive
together with like duct tape, right? There's no design.
Right.
It's just, how do we make this work?
Okay, so it would receive an HTTP request and then invoke one of the scripts in CGI bin to
Yes,
receive the
yeah.
bytes from that request and then spit out. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, thank
So,
you for that. How does it know which script to invoke in CGI bin?
Oh, well, that's where the fun comes in. That's where you have to do config files, like Apache config files, and Nginx config files, and you'd screw around with these, and you'd FTP them up to the server and reload the config file. And if you made a mess of it, bang, no website, right?
Wow.
There's none of this like canary testing, that sort of fun stuff. It was just broken website for clients. But the good thing was, there's probably only like one visitor an hour.
There was
so usually they didn't notice. You didn't know.
There was
You didn't
so
need to
many
know
broken
that.
websites I had just because I messed with CGI bin. Wow. Anyway, okay. Sorry
yeah.
for the side note and the tangent, but
No,
now I
mean,
get
that's
it.
like important.
Thank you.
That's important
Yeah.
internet history, right?
Good. I get it. So you were doing this, and then how did we get from there to?
So the mathematics department gave us access to our own CGI bin. You could write your own scripts and build your own interactive websites. That was more privileges than the computer science people. I guess because the computer science professors kind of knew it was a bad idea, but the maths professors didn't care. So I learned how to do, basic things like email contact forms, Sudoku games, that type of stuff. But I also learned how this language Perl, which was kind of it's kind of like PHP with more syntax and more weird symbols, and it does even weirder things.
Wow.
So the summer was coming up. I needed a job coding, and I found, this is with the very basic internet. This is before Google. Right? This is, I think, Yahoo or something. Anyway, somehow I managed to find about 70 website development companies in Ireland, and I wrote a Perl script to spam them with my resume and an email saying, please give me a job. I got 3 interviews, and the place I eventually got a job with was this tiny little web consultancy. It was like 6 people. The tech guy running it he used to design tractors. He was like a proper mechanical engineer. And he was like, okay, yeah, well, you probably know as much as me, so yeah, you could be an intern. And that first summer, I kept driving him crazy, getting him to debug my regular expressions. I think he regretted it a hell of a lot. Yeah, so it's an accidental career, but wow. I mean, you know what it's like, right? Coders are so lucky.
Yeah.
Because we will do this big secret. You don't have to pay us. We do it anyway.
Yeah, and it's so much of it is just right place, right time. Like I was born when the internet was close enough anyway. And I was born around the time open source started to get traction. Much like you mentioned you started your career around this time. And it's you just catch the wave. We just caught it's very I like your use of the word lucky there. Okay, so you studied mathematics, philosophy, and then decided to take a chance on computer science with this internship, and this tractor person, how awesome, helped you. And then from there, you've been working at consultancies, as you've mentioned, and now you lead one. You lead VoxGig. What was the transition like, switching from being a developer to being, to more leadership style positions?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So I got up to kind of team leader level working for startups and consultancies. And then I decided to become a freelance contractor for a while. And I wanted to set up a SaaS. That's a whole different story. We might get to that. But I got ill, and that company I had to shut that company down. And I ended up going back into a large organization, actually an Irish university, working as a principal investigator. So anybody who's worked on that side of the world knows principal investigator is like a special term. It doesn't mean that you do any science. It means that you fill out grant forms. Your job is to get grant funding. Right. And I ended up leading a team of about 30 or 40 people in that organization as part of we did technology transfer. So we did research, and then we launched companies like Google, was launched out of Stanford this time.
Yeah.
So that was quite fun, but I guess bureaucracy. I mean, it wasn't like a huge org, but definitely if you've been free. If you've been freelance, Y Combinator was taking off at the time, and Paul Graham's essays were filling my head with nonsense. I mean, they're good essays, but I kind of got the buzz. I got to do a proper SaaS. Got to do something.
Right.
And none of the SaaS companies that I started around that time worked out, and I was skint, as we say here. I was literally out of money. Like down to not going to pay the mortgage very soon.
Wow.
And it so happened that 3 good friends of mine were in relatively similar situations. So the 4 of us got together and said, okay, we'll just build websites and apps for people. And it was one of those unique circumstances where the right group of people got together at the right time. I had just got into Node.js. And it took off, and we randomly became, probably for a couple of years, easily the biggest Node.js consultancy in Europe.
Wow.
So this is a classic kind of marketing startup story. So imagine you are a consultancy in a very new technology that is regarded as being a bit silly, right? So even the Java C# guys still think Node is a bit silly. You're stuck in the southeast corner of Ireland, not even the capital city. All the money is in the US. Right, Walmart did their API in Node. That was kind of one of the big turning points. How on earth do you get any business? What do you do?
Exactly. This was exactly my next question.
And none of us were very good at content marketing. I mean, I do a podcast now, but that's years later. So one of my co-founders, a guy called Keena Modine, he went to a couple of conferences. Kind of got the idea of doing our own conference. So we're this tiny, less than 10 person consultancy, no funding. But he happened to know the bank manager quite well in his local town. So tractors are a theme for some reason. We got something called a tractor loan. So we borrowed money to run this conference. Okay. I'm first of all, what's the outcome? Let's focus on that, right? Let's be proper business guys about this. So the outcome was the way that you launch a business like that is to get known is you've got to have some marketing angle. And the one we eventually came up with was to invite all of the Node.js people from the States, mostly, over to Dublin to the Guinness factory and run a conference in the Guinness factory for 200 people.
Nice.
That was a genius move. and it wasn't my idea. I have to credit my co-founder with that. And I don't think we really knew if it would work, but we knew running conferences and supporting open source and focusing on community was a good idea. But how do you pay for a conference when you have no money?
Right. You get a tractor loan.
You get a tractor loan. So I don't know if this exists elsewhere in the world, but in Ireland, there's a lot of agriculture. And if you need a new tractor, you're a farmer, you need a new tractor. Tractors are really expensive one-off payments. But you also get a really large one-off payment yourself when you do the harvest and all the money comes in. So a tractor loan isn't paid off monthly. It's paid off in large chunks, like 2 or 3. So I got this loan for 50K, not for a tractor, for running a conference. Spent all the money on a conference, and then we were able to pay it back. We got like a 100K deal out of that conference. Literally the same week, we ended up in a hotel foyer with this team that had come over, and they're like, "We love you guys. We need this thing built." It wouldn't happen now. not with interest rates going up. Back in those days, it was a bit easier. I think. I don't know. What's the lesson out of that for business? There's this thing about like don't follow the rules or break the rules. It's not really do bad stuff and break the rules. It's just it's easy to impose artificial limits on yourself, right? It's easy to say we'll never get a bank loan for that.
Yeah.
But maybe if you just you pester the bank manager enough to find some angle.
Yeah,
where it can be possible.
Well, also, it's interesting that this was your take on business development, right? Because you're like, let's just do a conference and invite all the Node people. Because I have to think that was somewhat novel. That too, in the Guinness factory in Dublin, of all places. It's just so novel. And the reason I want to highlight this is because as part of Founder CEO season, we've had tons and tons. This has been going on for almost a year, right? Well, maybe that's not true. Like half a year, probably. But we've had so many. Every single Monday, we've had founders and CEOs, and we talk. At some point, the conversation goes to the marketing side and business development and product market fit. And they often say that the hardest thing about building a business, whether it's a SaaS business or a consulting business, it doesn't matter. The hardest thing is positioning and marketing. This is the most common response from people. And these people are building ridiculously technically complex products. Glauber Costa, one of our guests, is building globally replicated SQLite databases with strong consistency, right? And he's like, yeah, that's cool, but the marketing is so hard though. And so for y'all to have this really great idea with the conference and then running it and then successfully getting a 100K deal out of it was so incredible. Now, was this something that left a lasting impact on your then business?
Yeah, because very quick. This wasn't done as a grand strategy, right? This was done just randomly. It was pretty crazy. We knew a conference was kind of a good thing to do, but it was kind of random. We just had a feeling that community was a good thing to invest in.
Right.
That conference, became the main marketing angle of the company for a couple of years until we reached a larger level of sustainability.
Right.
But
how did you reach that larger level of sustainability?
So this is the other thing that's kind of weird. Until you've experienced it, it's hard to understand growth. So that company doubled in size every year, which is pretty good going for consultancy. It's not okay. It's not the exponential stuff you get from an awesome SaaS, but doubling every year is still an interesting experience. Especially when it's people heavy, right? Consultancy is all about people. So, you're more than doubling headcount.
That's incredible. How? And did it scale well? Because oftentimes when headcount grows so rapidly, you might have some bad actors join you.
Yeah, we got to cheat on that one. So one of the facets of consultancy is that all the teams are kind of separate from each other because they're working with clients. So you don't have to create such a unified structure. Which lets
so you just get a bunch of people and then assign them to various clients.
There was, I remember there was another little trick. So this would work in any company, and I've tried to do this since. Hire people, preferably founders, from failed startups.
Interesting.
They are the most awesome people in the world. Right? You hire somebody who has founded and failed a startup. That person has a level of maturity, emotional balance, self-knowledge that's really hard to replicate. If you haven't gone through that roller coaster, you can read all the advice you want, read all of Paul Graham's essays. It's not the same as living.
Do you think it's because they've become humbled, they've had it sort of beat into them?
But also, I guess they understand. They understand how to take the perspective of the business.
Right.
So there's this thing people always chase of, making people feel ownership of the business, or, making good decisions. Like Netflix is famous. It's Netflix, right? Their famous handbook where it's like, just make sensible decisions. There's no budget limits. So don't do silly stuff. So you can operate much further, much longer with people from failed startups. I mean, of course, hire people from successful startups as well. The issue with people from successful startups, though, is they're not quite as hungry. Their startup was successful. They've probably paid off their mortgage. They're probably better at sort of mid to late scale-up phase. This phase I'm talking about is more kind of sub 100 people.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned this, because you also mentioned earlier that you've never worked at a big tech company. I have. And what you're saying tracks very, very strongly. Like a lot of the folks that I see at like late stage or big tech, this is no shade to them whatsoever, but tend to be more settled in life, so to speak. Like it's like, we're here, we're gonna make progress, we're gonna inch towards our goal. It's more there's less of a fire under your butt at larger companies.
Yeah, I mean, and some it drives people nuts. Eventually, they have to leave and do it themselves, right? That's also totally valid. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just that when you're in the arena fighting, as I say, and you're trying to decide who to hire, I think the qualities that you're looking for, where you don't know what you're doing and you need to delegate a lot, mean that other people who've been in the same situation just going to give you better outcomes for the most part. Once you get to 100 people, other fun stuff happens. That's when you understand why there's HR departments. Because there's literally something funky goes wrong with employees every month.
This is interesting that you mentioned, because we had as part of a guest on Founder CEO season, we had Sanket Sahu. He's the founder of a consultancy, a very large consultancy, 550 people last I checked. And he said exactly the same thing. He was like, look, we were good when we were small, but as we grew, we needed, he said, to have more, not necessarily bureaucracy, but more process. We needed more repeatable, reliable processes to function at scale. And he talked in depth about the trade-offs between having process and moving fast. And he made it very clear that once you reach a certain size, you just can't move so fast. And it sounds like this is exactly what you're saying. But why is that? What happens at that size?
So I don't know. You heard about this thing? I mean, this is such a cliche. I think you read about it. The fact that like the sort of average size of a village is 150 people, and historically villages didn't get much bigger because you can keep 150 people in your head, relationship-wise.
Right.
And you can definitely, I mean, I don't know what the exact number is, but definitely sort of up to 100 people in a company, you can kind of keep everybody in your head, what their issues are, what they want to do, and all that sort of stuff. So if you're the CEO or one of the founders and you sit down with people, or you see them for lunch, you understand enough context to talk to that person. But here's what happens. So I remember this very clearly because this was my first experience of this thing. I was in New York at an office of one of our clients. The client was showing me around the office, doing a tour, introducing me to a couple of their key people, and then he introduced me to this guy. He said, "Oh, this is Bob." Silence. Bob? Who's Bob? Bob was my guy. He was one of my employees. I didn't know.
Wow.
I didn't
What?
Know. Right. I didn't
Wow.
know. This is the first time I met this guy. He'd been hired in a different reporting chain. And it was just
how did Bob
weird
even feel about
experience. I mean, I was apologetic and rather embarrassing.
Man.
Yeah, so this is the other thing. Like, here's process, right? So if you run a really large consulting company with hundreds of people, and you're going to visit a client, you need to put a little bit of process in place around prep. So who's actually at the client? So I don't know if I can ask in front of my client. But yeah, that was just such a gut punch because the camaraderie you get in the early days of a startup means that you have a lot of feeling for everybody working together and you like to take care of people. But then you can't do that at scale. It's just not.
Yeah.
It's just not possible. I don't know. I don't know what you do at scale, really. I mean, I think that's a massive human civilization problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting to note that a lot of companies get this wrong. And I've seen some companies over-index on process where they just, as you mentioned earlier, they just cripple themselves and they can't really move fast. And other companies under-index on process and then they have cases where they join a client meeting and they don't know each other. That's wild that happened. So I guess finding the sweet spot is the key. This company we're talking about where you got the tractor loan and you did the marketing and then you got this big check, is that what would then become VoxGig, or is VoxGig something different?
So that company is Nearform.com. They're still going. They're a really big consultancy now.
Wait, you started Nearform?
Yeah, I was one of the founders.
What? That's wild. I had no idea. Nearform's awesome. I mean, I know Matteo Colina, who used to work at Nearform. I know Michele Riva. These folks, Nearform is incredible. I mean, the work they've done is enormous, and they have some of the biggest clients in the Node.js ecosystem. I can't believe you started that. That's so cool. Wow.
Yeah, that's 10 years ago now. Wow, it's a long time. More than 10 years. Oh my god. Wow. Okay,
so Nearform. Look, I know Nearform is so extremely technical. I mean, y'all are solving some really intense Node.js problems for some really intense clients where it's mission critical. And as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, Nearform does a white glove level service, right? Where they show up and it's very bespoke to whatever the client needs.
100%. 100%.
So then why, I want to walk now from there to VoxGig, because Nearform is this behemoth. Why leave the behemoth and go to something else? And where does VoxGig come into this?
So it was still a consulting company. And at that point, I'd never done a proper SaaS, as in set up a SaaS company, get funded, angels, do a Series A, the whole thing. So that was still a lifetime goal. We had tried to do a few things in Nearform that way. But I think the problem is when you have consulting DNA in the company and you've hired for that, you just don't have the ability to get the whole company to focus on the product. So Matteo is, I think eventually he got that itch, right? Because he does Platformatic HQ. And a SaaS is actually a very different organization. You asked that question about, how do you get everybody on the same page? Technically, how do you do scale? Well, that's easier, like I said, in a consultancy, because you don't have to as much. So I'd ended up in effectively developer relations in Nearform. I'd ended up being one of the guys who went around to conferences speaking about microservices and Node and all that sort of fun stuff. And I felt that space was really underserved in all sorts of ways. We were running the whole thing out of spreadsheets. So I felt there was space for a startup that focused on that problem space. I wasn't entirely sure what it would end up being. So around 2017, took the jump. Had enough cash to kind of self-fund an initial build. Actually, I'm just going to slightly divert a little bit, right?
Sure.
So one of the nice things about scale, this goes back to the fact that when you're doing your first startup and you haven't really scaled, the things you sometimes worry about are not really important. So once a company gets to a certain scale, it is an entity by itself. It cannot be killed by individual people. It has its own momentum. The only things that can kill it are other companies, right? So the iPhone killed BlackBerry. Or deliberately trying to kill it if you're a corporate raider or something like that. But a company by itself, once it has a sustainable market niche, and I use the word niche to mean a very big scale, then it's effectively unkillable over decades. So you're asking questions about, how do we make big companies, how do we solve these human communications problems in big companies? The problem is we don't have to. A lot of these companies can survive without solving the problem.
And
which is
yeah, and a lot of them do. I mean, but then is that good for people? Like, I mean,
no, it's terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it like a large company. Sorry, this is a total sidetrack, but we'll get back. A large company is effectively a communist organization, right? The way people are promoted, how it's run, all the silly rules you have to follow. It's not that my wife worked for Ericsson and she worked for SAP, so I had quite a lot of exposure to big companies. That's probably why I never ended up in them. And friends work there and that sort of stuff. But you give up a lot of freedom for that warm embrace. Yeah, it is very nice and you get a lot of security, but you're definitely accepting that inefficiency. I'm not sure. Obviously, some big companies are better than others, but I'm not sure there's an essential way that they can be run that isn't effectively communist.
Yeah.
That's the massive irony of Western capitalism, is that we have all these communist microstates inside.
But what do you mean? What do you mean a big company is like a communist organization? Because like as far as I understand, communist organizations is wouldn't a co-op be closer to that, where everybody gets an equal share of all the revenue? And because like with for-profit large capitalist companies, that's not the case, right? Like the people at the top typically earn far more than the people at the bottom.
I think there are examples of corporate companies, right, that do operate in that way. It just seems that if you know what you're doing and you can create 5-year economic plans and you can execute efficiently, let's say like Amazon, efficiently and brutally, you're going to win in the market. You're going to outcompete. So I don't know, is that there's always trade-offs. We'll get to this when we talk about microservices, right? There is massive collective good from the freedom of a capitalist economy. Right? All of us benefit. All of us benefit.
Yeah.
But there's a trade-off in that for a lot of people, the individual experience of work has much less freedom, which is why you have so many freelancers and difficult people going off doing startups and that type of stuff. And that's why also why you need startups to do anything new and interesting. I often get frustrated when people use like Steve Jobs and Apple as an example, because it's literally the example that proves the rule. Right? He was completely singular. Almost all big companies do not work that way.
Right. What you're saying is there tends to be some type of survivorship bias, where companies that do follow that and then succeed, those are the only ones you see, but you don't actually see the ones that tried and fail.
Exactly. To return to our discussion, which was VoxGig and developer relations. Yes, so I've been doing developer relations effectively. I felt it was very underserved in terms of the needs of DevRel teams and speakers, that sort of stuff. But I didn't have a very clear idea of what the product should become. Over the course of about 2.5 years, it ended up being a management system for attending conferences. So when people have to run the booth and collect leads and people they've been talking to, but usually it's not just there's a booth, right? There's usually a speaker as well, and you would have sponsored the conference. Managed that whole process, collecting metrics, right? So that was fantastic. We had some amazing customers. Disney Plus, right? It was awesome.
Wow.
It was awesome until March 2020.
What happened then?
So, boom, COVID hits, and so this is a formative startup experience. I spent the entire month taking calls from clients saying, "We're very sorry, we're going to cancel." We hadn't bedded in enough that, like most clients, had been with us for under a year at that stage. So, if you're not going to a conference, you don't need the service.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what was the service? Was it that you'd organize conferences or attend on their behalf?
It was for DevRel teams, for marketing teams that might look at, every month this year we're going to send a booth to a conference and a team. It might depend on who gets CFPs accepted. Obviously, we're going to go to strategic ones.
Right, so if we walk through this, a client like Disney Plus would come to VoxGig and say, we'd like to go to this many conferences and have a booth. And then VoxGig would help them do that?
Well, no, it's self-service SaaS, right? So they would organize it themselves using the SaaS platform. And interesting enough, a lot of it wasn't about selling. A lot of it in those days was about recruiting. So if you go and speak at a developer conference, you're not there to sell per se. You're there to recruit. Like people forget, right? 2019, it was impossible to find developers.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so Disney Plus would use this platform to find conferences and apply to them and attend them and maybe sponsor them with a booth.
We had like an app where you get people's details.
Got it. Okay, so this was a SaaS product that makes it easy to discover events for large companies.
Yeah, to do the event side of DevRel.
Got it.
So that was fantastic, like I said. But literally, by March 30th of 2020, we had 0 customers. So that was fun. We had to. Now I have to say I had angel investors on a board. Some of the investors have been investors in Nearform, and I was freaking out. And this is the advantage of having a board and having a good board, right? So some people are scared of it and they don't want to be constrained, or they feel like giving updates to the board all the time is onerous.
Yeah.
When things go badly wrong, that's when a good board is going to really help. We sat down and they basically said, go into hibernation. Fire everybody. Right? Conserve all the cash. Like we'd literally done a funding round 6 months earlier. Wow. Conserve all the cash. Batten down the hatches, wait for the storm to pass. Now, we didn't know, of course, how long COVID would last. But it was just, stop bleeding straight away. And hopefully the market will come back. It never did, unfortunately. It never did. But in the meantime, we tried a whole bunch of things. We had to completely reinvent the company and come up with new products, right? So we did kind of a virtual events management platform. We did an event recommendation system before LLMs. That was really hard. That was it wasn't very good. The thing that actually worked, ironically, so this is, man plans and God laughs. The thing that actually worked and saved the business was white labeling the SaaS platform and using it to help other founders build quickly. So I ended up back in consulting. So we we didn't do that as our main business, but it ended up being a fairly significant activity through COVID and just after COVID, where we would take what we built. Now, this kind of goes into the microservices end of things, right? This is where I proselytize, because it was a microservices platform, and we could white label it and reuse functionality like Lego for completely different systems very easily because of the architecture. That gave us enough of a war chest to relaunch, and so conferences came back, but the corporate budgets around, here's free money, just set up a booth, make stuff happen, that's not there anymore. But developer relations didn't stop. Developer relations started becoming very, very important, because you started having the rise of dev tools companies, you started having much more API focused companies. I know like DevTools has taken a bit of a punch to the face in the last year or so, but I think that's more a symptom of an overall market trend rather than anything fundamental. Because there is now an API economy for sure. There's now a DevTools economy for sure. You need developer relations for that. So we're a developer relations agency. So I'm still doing bloody consulting. but in the process of being an agency, we're collecting a lot of interesting observations and insights, which we're slowly turning into a new SaaS platform around this stuff.
Awesome. Awesome. I've seen this dance between agency and SaaS multiple times. I think of, Geeky Ants is the consultancy by my friend Sanket that I talked about earlier. They have about 550 employees, and they also felt the squeeze during COVID and are thinking of what would a product look like. And they have been thinking about this for a long time, right? Because, and like as a consultancy, you're uniquely positioned to see such a broad variety of use cases and things and pain points and things people struggle with, where you go, oh, I could solve this for all my clients with 100%. A product. This Lab. So we have Tracy Lee, the CEO of This. Same thing. I know they've toyed a lot with various products for this. So I think that's so interesting. And I'm really excited about whatever product you'll end up shipping.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a few fun side projects. We did now it's nothing compared to the really cool AI stuff you've done with podcasts, Tejas, but we did a AI chatbot. So I'm awesome. A big fan of the sci-fi writer Ian M. Banks, and he's kind of big into AI. So I thought it'd be really cool to kind of capture the mind states of all the podcast guests and kind of chat to them. So it turns out it's really easy to glue all the APIs together. Not so easy to get high quality results. That's where the fun stuff comes in. And we've a couple of other things brewing that'll be coming out soon enough. But we're not operating like a traditional startup, because the way we're doing it is because we can't get more funding because of what happened effectively. We're doing things as experimental side projects, seeing what happens traction-wise. There is an operating business, so that's nice. So I don't know, is it bootstrapping? It wasn't intentional bootstrapping. It's kind of God rolled the dice and said, oh, yeah, you wanted to do a Series A, tough luck, you're going to bootstrap. I mean,
it's probably for the better, because you have more control over your organization, and you can focus on things that you feel are important more so, right? Because you're answerable to fewer people. Yeah.
Well, this is true, and I mean, I have in fairness, I have seen friends who have gone down the pathway of the full startup and done the Series A, and I mean, it's very tough at the moment, right? Like a million, ARR used to be awesome. Not anymore. Yeah. That's table stakes, if even, right? And I think, unfortunately, like I said, once companies hit to a certain stage, they're kind of unkillable. But the problem is, a startup with $1 million ARR that's in a Series A is not there.
Yeah.
because they don't have that sustainable market niche where they have actual margins and revenue.
Yeah, and hopefully there's enough promise there though that they can raise a little bit more to get over the fence, right?
Yeah. Absolutely,
Yeah.
right. But it's still, that's the other thing about scaling. Just to go back to that particular issue, if you're listening to this as someone who's going to be a founder or that's just started, the problems never go away. It's just more zeros. So they're the same problems, unfortunately. Now, some of those zeros end up in your bank account and you pay off the mortgage. But for the company, it's just more zeros. It's just the same problems.
The zeros keep adding up. The problems maybe even grow with the size of the operation and the people. I want to circle back a little bit to DevRel. There was a saying going around recently that DevRel is a zero interest rate phenomenon, and that meaning when interest rates reach zero, a bunch of people rush to borrow credit because it's low interest. And so there was a big influx of folks doing DevRel and so on, because there was this perception of we're not going to have to pay much interest on this investment. But over time, and as the economy got worse, I think a lot of companies, and I also used to run a DevRel consultancy in the past and also shut it down. I think what I noticed was a lot of clients and companies were making statements like, this is way too expensive. I don't know if this is a good investment. A lot of questions around ROI started showing up much later that didn't exist in the beginning. And it does feel like there was a zero interest rate phenomenon in the beginning. And now companies are like, whoa, this is way too expensive. We can't be spending $20,000 on this event, because usually that's the cost, right? Like you pay for a sponsorship, but then you've got to pay for marketing materials and swag, and then you've got to pay people's plane tickets to go there and hotel. It adds up really quickly to the point where it's no longer.
You need a software platform to manage it all.
Right, exactly, and it's no longer an expense; it becomes an investment. And since DevRel is so top of funnel, like a lot of that, you don't know if it's ever going to reach the bottom of the funnel, right? So people end up going like, "Is it worth it? Should we even consider?" And now that the interest is apparently higher, some are making the claims that DevRel is dying or dead. What is your take? What is your response to that?
That style of DevRel, where it's unaccountable top of funnel stuff, where it's almost performative, it was always on a short timer, because eventually you have to pay the bills. It's super fun, right? But I think DevRel it's becoming more seen as a specialized activity of marketing, developer marketing. So we have a client that does this really awesome thing where every time somebody onboards with them, they set up a private Slack channel, and they have bots that will monitor that channel and then pick the right person in the organization. So you get this really amazing developer experience with them. Now, it's a highly technical product, right? So, but not a lot of companies do that. Or a lot of companies would have like a shared Slack channel. But the problem with that is that it doesn't feel white glove, and you can't talk about stuff that's under NDA. You can't really get the highest level of service. So, I would say that developer relations covers that type of thing as well. It is how you manage the experience that developers have with your organization from beginning to end, right? So there's another company. They're not a client of ours, but I'd like to use them as a template, as an example, if they'll forgive me. ModernTreasury.com. So one of the really cool things they have is a whole series of articles on how to code accounts. Like if you're like building a bank, right? How do you do it? So we had another client, a B2C fintech, this is not on the DevRel side, this is on the sort of consulting side, that was building a rewards application, which means that everybody gets points, and you have to operate the points as a ledger, right? You spend points and you get points. So you have to do double entry bookkeeping. Modern Treasury has this fabulous set of articles, long form articles, that explain how to build a bank, how to write the code for a bank, how to do double entry ledgers. Now, I haven't used Modern Treasury, but you know what? A lot more people know about it because I mentioned it to people. And if I ever was in a situation where I needed banking APIs or to recommend banking APIs to people, I would recommend them. And I haven't even actually taken a close look at their APIs. Right? The only part of their developer experience that I know about is the fact that they have these super high quality articles. That's a much more effective form of developer relations and a bit more measurable than running a booth and giving away like ridiculous things, soft toys or something.
Yeah. I like your notion of end-to-end DevRel. Like a relationship isn't just I'm going to get you in the door, but I'm going to take care of you once you get in the door, and I'm going to see you. You're now living in my hotel, and you're my responsibility through and through. This is so interesting because I've seen, as I ran my DevRel consultants, I'm sure you've seen this as well. A lot of companies will, like you say, put them under marketing, and it literally just becomes tofu, top of funnel, right? And it's very performative. But they have this funnel, they have this pipeline where DevRel serves that role. And once someone enters the funnel, then they get handed off to a salesperson. And once the salesperson closes them, they get handed off to customer care or customer relations. And then when they have problems, they get handed off to customer support. And one of the challenges with such a multi-tiered approach is that at some point, I would love to know if you agree with this or not, at some point it becomes a game of broken telephone where you're not sure if their message at the beginning is the same message that customer solutions is solving at the end. But on the other hand, if it's end-to-end DevRel like you mentioned, the other challenge becomes we don't have that many people. I guess this is why they need a consultancy, because then they just bring in VoxGig and y'all do it full time.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's more about helping them get set up themselves so that they're independent. It's the classic consulting line, right? Our job is to get fired, because it's the problem a lot of companies have is exactly that, those silos. And you have the coders who are the people who can maybe do it most effectively, but they're coding. They're not available. On the marketing side, a lot of the stuff they end up doing just annoys developers. So you have to bootstrap an entire new organizational unit inside the company, or a subunit of marketing at least, that has the right people, that has the right approaches, that knows how to do developer marketing in the right way, all that sort of stuff. That's what people still need a lot of help with.
But would it not be more lucrative to just keep them dependent on you and to not get fired?
Okay. So that's an interesting question. Actually, that takes us back to Nearform, right? So Nearform became a hyper-successful consultancy, right? And one of the key things that we did was to optimize for getting fired. Right? So speed of delivery, proper collaboration with the client, allowing the client to stand on their own 2 feet and do their own things. The paradox is that that creates aligned incentives. So the paradox of that is that you actually end up with extremely long-term clients. So VoxGig on the consulting side, like our average client lifetime is 2 years maybe.
But how does that work? How do you end up with such long-term clients if you go in, do the job, time to delivery is short, you get it done, you get fired, or the job's done, the contract's over? How does that then become long-term work?
Because if you build up enough trust, the contract never really ends. Right? So if you've actually delivered, so here you have to think about the economics of hiring a consultancy. So if you are a mid-level manager and you've appropriated budgets, or you've been given a goal, and you recommend hiring a consultancy to do the job, and it doesn't go well, you're not getting much of a bonus or promotion. But if it does go well, and if it goes well because you know that the consultancy
can deliver,
is not just can deliver, it's focused on collaborating with you to understand the bigger picture in the organization. It's not just about delivering. It might be, for example, you might have to take a break. You might have to do 3 months and then stop for another 3 and then pick it up again because a VP is getting reassigned or something, and it wouldn't be politically expedient for the middle manager to look for money now.
Right.
They have to let that VP bed in and then ask for the money later. So if you're just going, oh, well, we're not going to, we're just going to walk away, and either you pay the money now or so. Yeah, it's like we have this idea of something like a trust battery. So when you start with a new client, the trust battery is empty. And software projects, best will in the world, even if you use microservices, are very difficult things to bring in on time, right? And it's almost impossible. You can't build a feature on time properly. It just can't be done. But if you build up enough trust with a client that they understand that you're not trying to fleece them, that you're trying to find the optimal solution. Yeah, we have to cut some features, but we're going to focus on the ones that have the most business value because we bother to understand your business. Once you build up that level of trust, they want to keep working with you and they want to keep coming back because they know that you're good guys, right? They know that you understand long-term value building, as opposed to just, I want to charge as much as possible this quarter, and here's my billable hours. Good luck.
Yeah. But that seems like it seems like a more difficult thing, and two, it seems like a slower burn, so to speak. Like, and it's like the opposite of it's a very delayed gratification,
yes.
right? Which is probably why the good consultancies do it and stick around, and the ones that fleece their clients don't.
Yeah, I mean, consultancies. I mean, you ran one, right? So it's interesting if you look at the sort of the way that they end up being categorized. You have these consultancies that are. You have freelancers, right? But that's kind of a different thing. You have consultancies that always are around 10-ish people and they never grow. And then you have ones that are sort of 50 to 100 people. They kind of get stuck there as well. And then you have ones that just go hyperscale, right? But once you get over about 100 people, you're going to be scaling. And I think sometimes because cash flow is such a terrible thing, it can lead to short-term behaviors that sort of stymie the long-term growth of the consultancy. It takes a lot of courage to say to the client, yes, you can pause, like a startup that needs to get another funding round. To say to them, yeah, you can pause, you can put us on pause. Oh dear, I have 2 developers I can't feed this month. What do I do? Right. And you can do it without giving us any notice, but we'll be here for you in 3 months' time. Yeah. That's scary. it can be very scary. Right? But if it leads to long-term trust, then you do have more stability over the long term.
And this worked for Nearform. So would you say this is what made Nearform the sort of big league consultancy that it is? Just like really, really biasing towards great work, but above.
Yeah, one of the things. The problem with business is it's super complicated, right? There isn't a single magic thing that you can do. It's a factor of things. So if you can find a small group of people that are from failed startups, that was definitely a key, right? If you can find some sort of marketing, some sort of method of marketing that resonates. So for me in VoxGig currently, it's doing a podcast. Way easier and less stressful than running a conference. I can tell you. But
is it the same outcomes though? I mean, as a podcast host, it's interesting to me, right? Because I speak at a bunch of conferences and I have a podcast, and I'm curious what your experience is with that, going from like full-on events to like podcasts.
Yeah, I think podcast is a slower burn. Like nice thing about conferences and events is that it's physically there with people. It takes so that the building connections happens more quickly. With a podcast, it's it's much slower. It's not going to happen. Nothing's going to happen kind of overnight. But the nice thing about it is you end up building really cool long-term relationships with people without having to fly over the Atlantic all the time. I used to get like chest infections every 2 months.
Because of travel?
I had to have like, CT scans and all sorts of crazy stuff. There was a doctor who wanted to drill into my nose to widen my naval passages at once. I said no to that one. He said, so this guy says to me, there's a slight chance you might go blind. 1%. He said, but it hasn't happened to me. Yeah, dude, I'm gonna have a blocked nose. I'm not gonna. When I stopped,
and all of these were symptoms of travel for conferences,
or yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Wow. It's not a very healthy lifestyle. It's super fun, right? But it's not very healthy. So you've got to find. Just going back to, I don't know, success factors, right? So you've got to find some marketing thing that works, because you have to have an audience of some kind, some way. You have to build it some way. And then I think you have to have the way we do things, right? So for Nearform and for VoxGig, it's what we want is a long-term high trust relationship.
Right.
And that's it's ethos, but it's also strategy. Because it has certain types of outcomes, and we accept the trade-offs, maybe, which is, cash flow fun at certain times.
Yeah. Also like probably heavy uncertainty other times, right? Because like like you mentioned with what was it, March 2020, you had 0 customers at VoxGig. Now, that was a product, but still, like, the uncertainty is super real, and for a consultancy even more so. If you're biasing towards high trust, then you're forced to do, and if you have a really cracked team that ships really fast, maybe you're not making enough from billable hours. So
okay, so that's another interesting factor if I think about it. If you have some sort of a way we do things around here, and you're serious about it and pervades the organization, it means that you design the organization to make it happen. So if you are optimizing for long-term high trust relationships, you need developers who might fail lead code interviews, but have higher emotional intelligence and might have some business experience. So I have a crowd who works for me who was an accountant. So that's just the most amazing person to put in front of a client, because he understands business. He can talk to business owners at their level, and he also understands, the economics of investing money in a product and then trying to generate margin out of it, all that sort of stuff. But then if I have, if I take on a junior who's just into coding, I'll put a lot of effort into coaching them about business and people, and okay, we're working for this manager, but she has such and such a political situation going on, which means that she's going to ask us to do stuff that's technically silly, but we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah,
because there's a bigger picture. So you end up optimizing. I mean, if you look at the Nearform case, hiring people from startups optimizes for people who understand the importance of customer relationships, who aren't going to go and hide in code. And it doesn't mean it's wrong, right? So if if what you want to do is like hardcore coding, that's pretty cool, right? You just need to go to an organization where that's effective and the right thing.
Yeah.
Consultancy tends not to.
Yeah.
Tends not to. Oh yeah, so the one final success factor, luck.
Come on.
Luck.
Yeah.
It's just, we could have set up a consultancy building Java apps or I don't know, iPhone apps or something. It was just that I randomly saw Ryan Dahl's conference talk. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. I had randomly, the previous startup that I'd worked in, we built effectively a Heroku for mobile apps. Scripting language that we'd chosen was the Rhino engine running on Java. I gave you JavaScript in the back end. So I got into JavaScript that way. Randomly got into Node.js before it took off. And then here we are running a consultancy based on Node.js as it becomes popular.
Right.
that's random, right? That's
So
just luck.
to tie to tie it back to the beginning of our discussion where we said those of us with tech careers, most of us just got really lucky because of being in the right
Yeah,
place at the right time.
there is that, right?
Yeah.
So you can't discount it. I don't know. There's all these things about make your own luck, and you have to create luck situations, and I guess that's true. But there is kind of some fundamental universal thing that you just have to accept. I don't know. Maybe I'm not a very spiritual person, but maybe I'm getting a bit spiritual here, right? The aspect of the universe that you just kind of have to accept, that you can't do much about.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people talk about founder mental health, or even open source maintainer mental health. And a lot of founders struggle with that because the pressure is so great. A lot of it is out of your control. That doesn't mean you shouldn't work your ass off. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try, right? It's definitely not going to happen if you don't try. But a lot of stuff is just random.
Yeah, and I think
It really is.
that's maybe a comforting thought, because it makes it less personal. Like I know a lot of folks who run businesses that they would say failed, and they automatically like assume the identity of I built a failed business, therefore I'm a failure. And you go like, no, there's so much randomness here. It could have just been timing, right?
100%.
And I think that really helps this distancing. Okay, I want to zero in on. So you're running VoxGig now. It's consulting services for DevRel for companies. What challenges are you facing? Has DevRel changed in recent times?
Okay, I guess our challenges come from the type of clients that we focus on. So DevTool companies are, they have to do a whole bunch of DevRel, but guess what? Their founders tend to be developers, so they kind of know what they're doing. Unless they need muscle. I mean, you can find muscle, technical writers, all that sort of fun stuff. But they don't tend to need guidance. And then very large companies tend to have their own teams, or they hate developers and are just not going to do DevRel, and you're knocking on a closed door. But there are a lot of mid-sized companies, 200, 300, 500 people, where the company is actually an API company. Right? The company provides financial services or HR or building management or all sorts of stuff like that, right? A lot of it is vertical SaaS, where over the last 5 years, especially, they need to be able to integrate with tons of things. So they have an API. I literally got a question from an old client last week where they were saying, can we reverse engineer our code to spit out an open API specification? So I was kind of going, oh, that's cool. Maybe we should talk about doing it the other way around. But that particular API is 9 years old, right? So they have massively successful business, API-based business, but they haven't done any developer relations. All the sales have been at the business level. And they're now starting to see a lot of their, perhaps we can call it stripification, right? Someone has probably used that term before, right? But I'd call it stripification. So I don't know, did you ever integrate any payment processing systems before Stripe?
No, not before Stripe. No, I'm
before
spoiled.
Stripe, right? Super fun, really super fun. Calculate your own HMAX, and if it doesn't work, good luck figuring out why. What Stripe did, in the early days, they had like code on the homepage, all that sort of stuff, was really focus on the developer experience and making the integration easy and getting it all to work. So what you're finding now is that a lot of companies are suffering from that because you have new startups that do have really good developer experience, and they are doing a bit of DevRel themselves. So these kind of mid-sized market incumbents are starting to realize that that's a capability they need to develop, and they need a lot of guidance around it. So it's very unsexy. Like a lot of the stuff we do, it's not. it's not what you would classically think of DevRel, right? Where you're going to a conference and you're doing a really cool talk about this fantastic dev tool you built. Like we're doing stuff like making sure that the Swagger actually conforms to the API. Basic stuff.
Or suggesting that they generate the API from the Swagger, right? Like a lot of folks do that.
Right? And then maybe you're going to have, like that Modern Treasury example, right? Maybe you're going to have some really high value content on a technical blog that isn't immediately going to generate conversions. Or maybe you're aligning, maybe your sales process is still traditional, but you're aligning your solution engineers with the developer relations process so that the developers feel like they're going to be looked after. Because again, this economic thing of if I'm a developer and I sign off on the integration, and then it doesn't work, it's my ass on the line. You know, it doesn't matter that I've got some sort of support contract with you. I'm the one that recommended something that doesn't work.
How do y'all also do like content generation for companies? Like so when I was running my consultancy, I had a lot of folks clients ask me like, hey, we need more blog posts. We need to ship more content. And they often didn't have the people to do that. So in this case, is that something VoxGig helps with?
Not so much. So yeah, we're definitely the much less sexier end of DevRel, right? We're bread and butter basics stuff. Our clients wouldn't typically, unless they're looking to build a developer sales channel, they wouldn't typically benefit a huge amount from that sort of content. Where it's like, how do I integrate React with the system or something like that?
Right.
What they need are, here's a sample app showing you how to use our API, because good luck asking ChatGPT. There's just no source content.
Right. So tutorials, early tutorials, and it sounds like developer experience work with making sure the API is aligned.
Yeah, so we white labeled the original platform that we built, again, like deconstructed the microservices into things like developer portals, that type of stuff. Often there is an existing developer portal, but there needs to be an onboarding portal that kind of sits in front of it, that type of stuff. And the other area would be a lot of people might have decent documentation, and the API has good. The open API definition is pretty solid, but they need to move on to the next stage, which is SDKs. The problem a lot of companies have with SDKs is, first of all, you need a wide range of developers with a wide range of languages. You need to build them. That's kind of the easy part. You need to document them. You need to create more sample apps, and you need to maintain the damn things, because the problem is the APIs are always getting new releases and new features. Right? How many times have you used an SDK that's like slightly out of date or something? So synchronizing
too often.
Yeah, synchronizing all that is actually really hard. So there's an interesting. I ended up persuading a journalist in Ireland for one of the major newspapers here to let me do a startup diary. I had built with Node. This is the first major application I built with Node. Was a full newspaper website, mobile apps, integrations, payment systems, everything. Right. Built it in 3 months. Absolutely crazy. Didn't sleep. It's a great project. Not with Docker. This is bare metal, right? 2 bare metal servers.
Oh my goodness!
Like running, setting up like LaunchD and all this type of crazy stuff, right? But I became quite good friends with one of the journalists who was involved with that, and I persuaded him about 10 years later to let me do the startup diary. And I don't know if you've ever worked in or come near to working in newspaper publishing, right? It is about delivering content on time, every week. This is a process. And I ended up being able to write 1,200 words in 1 hour.
What? Wow.
Yeah, which was because I'd forget. My deadline was 12 p.m. on Tuesdays. And you're running a company, you forget. And he would send me a mail at 10:30 going, "Where's my article?" And I mean, if you drop it, that's it, you're out, right? So
yeah.
bang, bang, bang.
Yikes.
You get if you do something regularly at high speed, you get very good at it, right? You know this story of, they gave people pottery classes, and one group was asked to make 100 pots in the day, and the other group was asked to make the most perfect one, and the ones that were asked to make 100 pots ended up producing higher quality stuff because they were iterating.
Interesting. That's so interesting. I have to look at. Is that a paper?
Yeah, where is that story? That sounds like Daniel Kahneman or somebody like that.
I will find that and put a link to that in the show notes. That's incredible.
Yeah, that's incredible. I must look that one up. It's a fun story. The outcome of all that experience was having a newspaper mindset, and I think for developer relations content, not so much the promotional side, that would be useful there as well, but certainly for the up-to-date documentation, it's much more about process than it is about writing code or writing content, because you need to be synchronized with the client's delivery process. So it's quite high touch.
Without maybe giving away too many business secrets, what's the best way to do that? To synchronize your delivery of content and docs?
I just applied the same trick that I used in Nearform, actually. So I'm absolutely terrible at following process myself. I usually have people that help me. Right, that's the founder thing. Know what you're bad at. I'm one of those founders that drives people nuts because I just can't follow things. So I tried to apply Agile, proper Agile, right? And I don't know if you can see it behind me. I have like the original extreme programming books. I tried to apply proper Agile and failed miserably. And that the failure mode actually ended up being successful. The failure mode was that every week we would commit to a working demonstration of the software. We would have a demo meeting once a week, get all the stakeholders in, show them the stuff, write down paper notes or maybe put up GitHub issues or something, and just do that every week instead of trying to have story points and tracking tasks and all that, because I just couldn't do it. So we would just try and get real feedback every week, and then we would deploy a live version so that they could log in and check it out whenever, and then send us random emails. So very lightweight, semi-agile process. But I applied the same thing to developer relations. So if you work with us, there's always a weekly meeting, and it always has to be relatively high-level stakeholders. And there always has to be, and if they don't attend, I get snotty, and I start sending emails saying, this is part of the contract. You've committed to this. So you give people levers of control on a very regular basis, and you can adjust to what they need. And then every week you're asking, like, what releases are coming up? Because people will publish calendars or make commitments, and then turned out we missed our compliance or something. So
right.
So it is very high touch, right? That's why it's hard to find a product out of that.
What I'm hearing is not only is it high touch, it's also contractually enforced high touch. Because my question was really like, how do you make them talk to you? Because that's usually the thing, right? Communication breaks down somewhere. And the answer you gave was, well, just put it in the contract and then hold them to it. I
have. It's larger organizations that can be a bit difficult that way. I have a stakeholder story. Failing to get the right stakeholder in the meeting. This is from the Nearform days. We were in a competitive tender situation to build a mobile banking app with a couple of different people. And we hadn't quite figured out that you need to make sure that you have the actual stakeholders in the meeting, the people with the budget. We won the deal, but we got to the final meeting and a new person was there, the actual VP who would make the actual decision. And she was sitting there in the meeting looking very grumpy, arms folded, glaring at us, didn't say a single word, didn't ask a single question. We did our presentation, and the final page. In consulting, often one of the things you do is you offer like a range of different pricing structures. So we had like a, kind of bare bones, medium, and then, bells and whistles. And I don't know what the prices were. Bare bones might have been 100K, and reasonable recommended was like 200, and everything fancy was like 300. She's sitting there looking at this. We finished the end of the proposal, the meeting, dead silence. Everybody's looking at her to see what she's going to say. She's sitting there glaring at the screen, and she goes, "Why is there no total?" She thought that these were all parts of the project. She would have authorized.
Oh, interesting.
We got a 200K project. She would have authorized a 600K project.
Whoa.
So if we had bothered to ask our initial stakeholders who the actual stakeholders were, find out the real context, that was 400K down the drain.
That
for the same project.
Yeah, that must have felt so bad. But I've had similar cases where I've misquoted to my detriment, and it's just a lesson. I bet that's the only time that happened, right? That probably never happened again.
Yeah, that never happened again. That was very painful. I have one other consulting story. Sorry, it just reminds me of all the failures.
No, it's good.
All the failures. In the very early days, we were trying to figure out, what market segment could we pitch our development services to, building apps. And there is a line of work where you build apps for advertising agencies. Like Emily in Paris and programs like that, right? Where they do all these marketing stunts and gimmicks, and they do something quickly. So we started pitching advertising agencies in Dublin. And this is chalk and cheese completely. We were clueless. We didn't know what we were doing. It was totally the wrong idea, the wrong fit. So we had a meeting with one of these agencies, and we went in. There was 3 or 4 of them from the agency there, and we did our pitch. As we were doing our pitch, which was technical, right? We can build apps for Android. We can build apps for iPhone. And we could do this and that, and we make sure they're cross-platform, whatever, right? All good DevRel type stuff. People in the meeting, these are people in the advertising agency, kept getting up and leaving. They were obviously like, these guys are lunatics. This is not right. This is a waste of time. I've real clients.
Wow.
Unfortunately, they all left. One by one, they all left, and the last person sitting there was like, "Oh no, I've been left holding the baby," and just bailed completely. So we thought, they're going to come back. So we sat there for half an hour in the conference room. They must have important meetings or something. And eventually one of them came in to do their own meeting, and they was like, "Oh, you're still here. We forgot about you."
Wow. That must have hurt so much.
So, tails between your legs, walk out the door.
Yikes.
We nearly killed ourselves laughing the whole way home. It was one of the most educational meetings I've ever had. Pay attention, right? Don't get so involved in your technical stuff. If you're losing the audience, I mean, this applies to conference speeches as well, right? If you're losing the audience,
I think so.
Pay attention.
But what can you do? I mean, if the audience decides to leave, what do you just be like? Please stay with me, like.
Well, this goes into another thing that you're learning in consulting, right, which is how to do sales, especially if you're technical. The best sales technique I've ever found is to get to know as quickly as possible,
whether they're gonna convert or not.
Yeah, you get them to say no, because if there's no deal, it's a total waste of your time trying. So it's funny because my co-founder, who was more of a traditional sales guy, and maybe this is a better technique, I don't know, right? I'm not a sales guy. He used to do a little bit more relationship building, but I didn't notice that the people that I thought were going to say yes anyway always did say yes in the end. Maybe they just wanted to be taken out to a free lunch first or something. You get really annoyed because I would go in and always quote prices pretty quickly and always establish whether there was a deal or not. I think it saved a lot of time. It's very emotionally draining. That's the downside. Wasn't there a series of articles called Rejection Therapy or something a couple of years back where this guy would go around trying to get he would try to get as many rejections as possible as part of his like startup training.
I don't know, but
That's
I know
another
like in
weird
the
link to look up.
yeah, back in the pickup artist toxic culture thing, that was a thing people used to do. They used to go out and try to get rejected.
Right. It wasn't that though. This is more asking for like ridiculous toppings on your bagel or something, right? So that people would have to say no to you. It's kind of like emotional growth or something,
right?
Yeah, I remember all that toxic stuff as well. Yeah, I know one or two individuals got into that game. Not very well anymore, I can tell you.
I got into that game when I was 15. But anyway, sorry, what were you gonna say?
I think the thing to do with all that stuff is just treat it as learning experiments. Because the problem with all the startup stuff is you can read all of the Lean Startup and all of Paul Graham and watch tons of videos. Who's that guy, Slidebean? He does some really good stuff around startups and that sort of thing. You can watch The Social Network, but the knowledge is only partially transferable. You just kind of have to go and do it and get punched in the face. A lot.
Yeah, what was it? There was a great quote. It was "Experience is the best teacher" or something like this. Excellent. I'd like to ask you the final question. This is the last question I have, which I think is it's important. It's probably one of the most important questions. So, as part of Founder and CEO series on this podcast, I've had so many people, as I mentioned earlier, and I've asked all of them the same question. And I'm trying to maybe compile this into some interesting list. But the context for this question is I was sitting with some friends who are founders and CEOs, and they were sort of expressing almost in lament. They were like, "Man, nobody prepares you for this. Like, I could never see this coming." Sort of like as you've alluded to in our discussion today as well. And I got to thinking, we write code that follows a language specification. Literally, I could go show you the HTML 25 megabyte language specification or the JavaScript language specification. Const means this, function means that, arrow functions do this. And I was thinking these language specifications are living standards, meaning they're standards for the language and they grow over time. I wonder, Richard, if there was a living standard for founders, technical founders maybe, or non-tech, whatever, founders, what would that look like? What clause do you think absolutely must be in there that people need to know? And it could be it could be rehashing something we talked about already. Like, for example, you just need to get punched in the face a few times and learn. It could be that the letter L doesn't stand for loss; it stands for lesson. It could be something like this. What would you add?
That's a fantastic question. I actually have a very strong opinion on this one. A lot of people recommend that you should get mentors, a mentor or two, that you're going to need it. But this is slightly different because finding a good mentor can be kind of hard. What you will find incredibly useful is joining a group of other startup founders. So there's various ways. I mean, some funding organizations organize them. There's ones that can be set up in ad hoc ways. There's groups that organize them. But there is nothing quite like being in a small circle of other founders, CEOs, being able to discuss stuff that you cannot discuss with your friends, your parents, people in your network, definitely not with employees, because it's scary, right? I just did my cash flow and we run out of money in 15 days. Can't tell that to an employee. Oh, well, actually, I mean, you shouldn't have any employees at that stage. But there's all stuff like, oh no, we're 80% dependent on one client and the VP just changed. In 2 months' time, we could be letting half the people go. How do I quickly find a replacement? Or should I be giving people notice now? I mean, it's kind of like... I suppose a therapy support group or something. It literally is therapy, actually, now that I think that. And the coolest thing that happens out of that is that you often get challenged. My wife does that for me. So literally at the weekend, I was saying to her, I like to work collaboratively. She said, yeah, when you're the boss. Right? But you'll get that from other CEOs as well. Like, you might be deluding yourself saying, oh, we can't enter the American market because XYZ. And they'll say, well, that's nonsense. Of course you can. That's the roadblock. I do. So yeah, I think that's the most important thing, because there's no way to provide programming language styles specific rules. It's just too weird out there, and it gets weirder every year. And how can you predict COVID or monkeypox or whatever's coming next, or wars, right? All that crazy stuff.
We had a discussion with Kelly Vaughn on the podcast. Kelly is a serial entrepreneur, just constantly founding things left and right, and recently made the switch from being an entrepreneur to being an employee. And we talked about, because there's a lot of backstory with this entrepreneurship that would lead one to go become an employee. And when we talked about, she got this exact same question, and she mentioned almost exactly the same thing you're saying. She was like, it's just so lonely. It is the loneliest place you'll ever be, ever. And she also expressed, this is so key, to find a group, a support group, a therapy group, a group of people in the same boat, because no one else can really relate to this experience. Your family, your friends, they're not starting companies. They don't have to pay salaries. They don't have to find a replacement VP. Okay, so the contribution from you that I hear is find a group of people and lean on them, because we can't do it alone.
And there are lots of official groups, right? You don't need to construct one. Right?
Yeah.
There's lots of, because this is a recognized thing, there's lots of CEO type or founder style groups. They may seem like a waste of time, but they're absolutely
essential.
Yeah, they're really helpful.
Fantastic. Well, Richard, listen, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a long time coming.
Super fun.
And I learned a lot from you. I learned that you started Nearform. That's so cool. I honestly thought you'd come on here and we'd talk about VoxGig a lot, but then you said Nearform, and I was like, whoa. So it's not lost on me. Just the grandeur of a company like Nearform and the work that you're doing with VoxGig. And on behalf of myself and all the listeners, thank you so much for coming and sharing these insights with us.
It's been great fun. Thank you so much, Tejas.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Richard Rodger. I hope you've had a really great insight and discovery into what it takes to build and scale a developer relations consultancy. Heck, you might be even listening and you may not even have known that developer relations was a thing. What is developer relations? And I often tell people it's like customer relations, but your customers are developers. I hope this episode has illuminated developer relations at DevRel to you, the value of long-term high-trust relationships, and really the value of just relationships with people. I think one profound lesson that Richard shared in the episode is the value of hiring founders from startups that either failed or didn't quite go the way they wanted. When people have such experience, especially founders from startups that no longer exist, Richard says these are the best people in the world. And it's true, because they come with a level of autonomy and a level of ownership where it's like, I'm going to build this with you, not for you. And, as Richard mentions in the episode, that is absolutely tremendous. And that's honestly one of my biggest takeaways, right? Is look for people like that. Because what I've also found is people are great, not even in the workplace, just like if there's a Christmas or Thanksgiving party, people will just come to help, and they'll know they have the skill to like make themselves useful and just like discover how they can be helpful. It's so cool. It's a skill that personally I have in the software world, but not so much in the physical world. I often just stand around and hope that someone will give me a job. In any case, do with that what you will. Thank you for sticking around. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast as much as I do, then a great way to support it without really any effort, I hope, is to, if you're watching on YouTube, then if you like the video and subscribe to the channel, that'd be a huge help. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, then I'd love it if you leave a review. Any review up to 5 stars, super helpful. Will just help people discover the podcast, and if it's good, they can decide for themselves. And of course, if there's anything useful here, like I just shared with you, this thing about hiring people from startups, I share that on social media. I think that's super helpful, right? And because if you learn, there's a high chance someone else will learn. And that's why this exists, to help people learn and get the most out of their life, frankly. And so please share. if it helps you, in the hope not that it helps me, but that it helps other people. And so with that, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for being a part of the podcast. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.